Now, this next story applies to all of us. We've all bought things or had to sign up for websites where we've had to sign on the dotted line or read the fine print. Well, it's getting finer and it's getting more interesting. Missy Sullivan's joining us to discuss it. Everybody buys, as you say, an electronic gift, and you have to, or if you're on a website, you have to hit I agree before you can go any further along. Do people actually read the fine print?
From the research that I've found, about 60% will admit that they don't read the fine print. You can imagine that a lot won't admit it. But there was another really interesting study I found where 96% of the people signed a contract that on the second page included that they would do push-ups on demand and that they would give electroshocks to the fellow participants. So they weren't reading it.
Yeah. So how has it changed recently, the fine print?
How has the fine print changed? It has gotten smaller. It has gotten, it's been printed more tone on tone with
because these companies are getting creative
in the back.
Is your story in Smart Money.
And it's getting longer.
Yeah.
A bank statement, or excuse me, not a bank statement, but a checking account disclosure agreement is now 111 pages. The documents for a software agreement, those have gotten 60% longer in the last couple of years.
Wow. I know you have some examples that you've brought up.
I do have some examples, and to show you the kinds of tricks that they use just graphically, going across the page, all the way across with no margins, using big blocks of capital letters, and of course tiny type.
Right.
The big blocks of capital letters, you think they would be bold and you'd be able to read it. In fact, it makes it much more difficult to penetrate.
And there's a lot of legalese in this as well. So even if you actually take the time and squint your eyes enough to read it, it's difficult to comprehend.
Under warrants of merchantability, for example, what is that, the warrants of merchantability? Really, that's a disclaimer saying that it's not, their product isn't necessarily fit to be sold. Well, aren't they selling something? They also say that they don't necessarily guarantee that they're not violating someone else's copyright. How is that?
Right.
So once you get into the fine print, it also says things in here like, this particular phone isn't meant to be used to run a nuclear weapons system, or
I might have to reconsider buying it then.
Yeah.
And what about the, I know some of the sporting events, and if you buy a ticket, you're signing your life away as well,
this is my personal favorite of the fine print. This is from one of our local teams from a major game. In fact, it's a World Series game ticket, and it's in 2-point type. It's 2-point type. The optics specialists that I've talked to say that 6-point type is really the threshold below which you really can't start to not be able to read things. This is 2-point type. Not only that, but again, it runs all the way across, so your eyes are going back and forth, and it's much more difficult to read.
And retailers too are getting in on this with some of the.
Yeah. Oh, I also wanted to point out the little pattern behind there, the little colored pattern that
it's
makes
something
it
very
that
hard
much
to
more
see on the monitor,
read.
but there really is like vibrant colors underneath that that really are distorting.
Right, these little blotches. I mean, how are you supposed to actually read what's on there?
And is that really the point, is that the sellers don't want people to actually take the time to read this?
Well, they're certainly not making it easy for you, right?
I mean, is this a legal obligation they have to do, or are they really kind of, I mean, tell us, really what the point is here. They don't want you to read it, and what options do consumers have, even if they do, they either have to accept it or walk away, right?
The people who write these are lawyers, and they're writing them for other lawyers, and the reason they're doing that is because they're afraid of lawsuits. They're afraid of class action suits, and right now, if you look at most of the contracts, over 75% of them have what's called mandatory binding arbitration. That's where basically it says, you the consumer, you have a problem with our product, you are not allowed to take your problem to a court and have recourse there. The only thing you can do is work with an arbitrator that most of the time we the company pay for.
Right.
So we have less and less recourse.
Missy, interesting stuff. We got to leave it there, unfortunately, but there is so much more about this in Smart Money, which is on newsstands now. Missy Sullivan's piece, check it out, called The Fine Print. Thanks so much.